All right, welcome back, everybody. This is another interview with another Word Posse author, and he will introduce himself right now.
Hi, I'm Mark Sumner.
Author of,
Author of The Naturalist. That's the new book.
or any of the books you want to.
So, author of 30-something books, actually, so many that I've kind of lost count. Devil's Tower, The Evolution of Everything, Devil's Engine, the Extreme Zone series, the News from the Edge series, books, lots of books.
Lots of them. So, writing credits, we just listed them.
Yep.
So, what is this new book, The Naturalist, about? I personally am very interested because I like ants a lot.
Okay, yeah, yes, this is a, you're just your typical book about a 19th century naturalist who happens to encounter very strange ants while in a collapsing British colony in Central America. So, you've seen this kind of book before, I think, although actually I hope not. But it's hard to fit it into a genre. It's more of a sort of action, adventure, science fiction, alternate history.
Are there any specific characters that you enjoyed writing for this one?
The particular book is written as almost a diary of this young guy. His name is Calvin, and Calvin is sort of my stand-in for that sort of 19th century naturalist that there seem to have been so many of, guys that were amateurs, but so knowledgeable and so dedicated and interested, that they would just do anything to learn more. So even though Calvin is not a professional biologist, he knows the names of all the different animals and he knows their habits, and he's very interested in all the plants and animals going on around him, which of course makes everybody else in the colony, which is more interested in making money, think he's quite odd.
So, what exactly is a naturalist?
So in this case, we're talking about what we think of now as an amateur naturalist, especially back in the 17th and 18th century, and on up through the 19th century. You had these guys that they might not be trained as biologists or geologists or whatever, but they went out and some of them made very important discoveries. You had a lot of guys who were things like clergymen, local church clergymen who went out and looked at the rocks in their area and made important geological discoveries, or people that just became fascinated with catching butterflies, or people that became fascinated with looking at beetles. And these guys ended up being the experts really on their subject, much more so than the people that were supposedly professionals. And so we owe a really big debt to these guys that were sort of amateur naturalists. They sort of laid the foundations for this, what would be the science of biology as we know it today.
So can you really go into detail what makes these ants weird, or do you want to keep it secret?
So I can talk about these ants. These ants, I have to say that I was inspired a lot by the old George R.R. Martin story Sand Kings. George wrote the story back when I was writing heavily. And I actually got a chance to talk to George about it, tell him how much I admired it. I even, for a while, bought from George the rights to make a video game based off of Sand Kings. But then I got busy with other things, writing novels of my own, and never did it, which is a shame, because Sand Kings would make a whale of a video game. But now it would probably cost way, way too much to license anything from George. But anyway, the thing that appealed to me was that these Sand Kings sort of had this intelligence in the way that most social insects do, but they could do things that didn't seem unnatural, but still were uncanny, if that makes sense. So I tried to get that same spirit into the ants, and the ants in this case are called ant riders. They're part of a little local legend for the area in which this colony is situated, and the ants look almost like knights on horseback. So the ants are broken into caste. There are little engineer ants, and there are little knight ants, and there are little horse ants, and there are little spy ants, and by working together they form a quite formidable little army as they start to march on the capital of this colony.
So did you do any research on actual ants and activities?
I did. I read through E.O. Wilson's book on ants, which is, if you haven't read that, boy, there's a good recommendation for you. E.O. Wilson would be one of the great professional naturalists of any age, and ants are his specialty. And his book on ants both has beautiful illustrations and has terrific insights. E.O. Wilson is the guy that really first began to describe accurately the nature of the intelligence behind social insects, the way that the patterns arise out of what looks to be sort of random behaviors. That we used to think of ants and other social insects as maybe having some kind of mass brain and having maybe the queen is directing them, and that's not what's happening at all. Each little ant is an individual organism doing its own little tiny program, but the behavior that results out of these very, very simple actions can be enormously complex and look very smart.
So were there any actual ants, like types of ants, that you were inspired by and maybe put in the book?
Well, so there's a couple that are real ants and that do get mentioned a bit in the book. One is harvester ants, which are very good at cutting up things, carrying them around. And the other is just the army ants that everybody's familiar with, the army ants that have been kind of the stars of a lot of horror shows over the years. And I think army ants alone are frightening enough to people because they've become sort of fairy tales on their own. I wanted to take those army ants and just take them one step further. Make them a little bigger, make them a little more complex, and make them not necessarily smarter as individual ants, but give them a society that allows even more complex behaviors to emerge.
Well, again, I'm really interested in ants. Did you take from any other kind of hive kind of animals, or did you just stick with ants in particular?
Well, I'm mostly looking at ants, but ants are right in the same family with bees and wasps. So some of the behavior that the ants events in this story is a little more wasp-like, and we do have some ants. I don't want to give away the ending, but we do have some ants toward the end of the story that in particular show some behavior that's actually stolen from some wasps rather than from any actual ants.
All right, I'm heavily interested. I love ants. They're interesting animals.
Yeah, these are cool ants. I wish I had myself a nice little ant farm where I could have some real ant writers to study, although you wouldn't want them to get loose.
So, you've had many jobs aside from just being a writer, correct?
I have.
What are some of the more interesting jobs that you've had?
Let's see, I've been a geologist and done exploration geology all across the U.S. I've led dinosaur digs in South Dakota and Wyoming.
I like dinosaurs.
Who doesn't like dinosaurs? And leading dinosaur digs was a great job. One of those jobs I'd still be doing if I could get somebody to pay me for it. And let's see, I worked for the National Speleological Society surveying caves. I had the great title of Expedition Coordinator, which was wonderful. And that was the job I had right out of college, and I'd still be at that too if it had paid more than minimum wage. And I've also had some pretty awful jobs. I've worked as a coal miner. I've worked cutting trees. That's no fun either. So some jobs out there are actual work. You get up every day and you actually have to literally do something that's heavy and dirty and hard. But other jobs, even like digging for dinosaurs, is also heavy and dirty and hard, but also a lot of fun.
So which of those were your favorite?
I'd have to say the caving job was my favorite. There were two occasions where me and one other guy that I was working with, a guy named Gordie Howe, no relation to the hockey player, happened to stumble on caves that had been unexplored to that point and had never had any human beings in them. So on 2 wonderful days, me and Gordie saw literally miles of cave passage that no human being had ever seen before. Put them on the map, got to name them, got to survey them. It was terrific. It's like, people that are mountaineering, they may be the first one to reach the top of the mountain, but they knew it was there all along. There was no surprise mountain. But when you're caving, you find that little cave entrance that nobody's noticed before, or you push through that little passage that nobody's gone down before, and suddenly you come up into a big 20 or 30 foot wide passage with a stream flowing down the middle and everything. And here's something nobody even knew was there. And now, it's just yours in a way that a mountain or a path or a hike can't be.
I'm sure going through caves and stuff probably helped with the Naturalist, since ants make their own cave systems.
I didn't think about that. Yeah, I guess we were kind of doing our own little ant impersonation there. But although the ants in the Naturalist don't do any tunneling that we see, they spend all their time on the surface, kind of like army ants don't usually dig into the ground. When they bivouac for the evening, they form little balls of ants to keep themselves warm, and the ants in Ant Riders do something similar. They form little patterns on the ground and form up in sort of ranks for defense.
Bees do a thing where they will surround a large hornet or something and vibrate and cook it alive. So that's how bees stay warm, I guess.
Yeah, bees are really capable of using those muscles in their wings to generate warmth and to keep themselves warm in really surprisingly cold weather.
So what's the name of that cave that you guys named?
So
there
was I was lucky enough to be doing work along a place in Trigg County, Kentucky, which is in western Kentucky, for the National Speleological Society, and we were on a river called the Little River, and there were a whole series of caves there that were already known, but we found a cave and named it Rimstone Runway because it was big and had formation called rimstone that forms around the edges of water in caves. And then we found another cave that no one had known was there, but a tornado had come through this property and uprooted a bunch of trees, and it revealed the location of this cave. And because that cave was right in the middle of where this tornado had gone through, we named it Hurricane Cave. And I guess we could have called it Tornado Cave, but we didn't. But Hurricane Cave, the last time that I looked at a map of it, had more than 5 miles of passage that had been mapped and was still going. So it was a pretty nice, complex cave, and that was one of my best days, pushing through that and seeing just how big this cave was really going to be.
So I'm assuming you don't have claustrophobia?
Nope, not one of my problems. Acrophobia, yeah, don't set me on something too high. I can climb a cliff or whatever. If it's something natural, I'm okay. Don't make me stand near the edge of a building. Yeah.
Don't send you up the arch.
No. I have a hard time in the arch. If I go in the arch, everybody else is over there looking out the windows, and I'm kind of standing in the middle, bracing my legs, saying, yeah, it looks great. Let's go down.
I've never even gone up in the arch. I've been in the little underneath area. So we did say that you kind of did use your spelunking skills for a little bit, with the Naturalist, but do you draw from any of those experiences for your books and short stories?
I think I certainly do, and certainly all of my books reflect to some extent my own interest. I did a young adult book called The Dark, and it's entirely set in a cave in West Kentucky, and in fact was really based on an archaeological dig I helped with in a cave called Savage Cave in Kentucky. So I took just about everything that happened in the real archaeological dig and lifted it for that book. But most of the time it's just more that things that interest me, that's what I end up researching, or that's what I end up writing about.
So you not only have had a bunch of weird job experiences, you've also had a lot of near-death experiences, I've heard.
That's just, I think it's a combination of doing weird things and being clumsy generates all these near-death experiences. Let's see. So I have an ultralight plane, which I one day was flying around this tree at pretty low altitude, thinking, boy, this is fun. I can go around and around this tree at only about 20 feet. And then I went above a little stream of water that was cold, and the air going over that stream was moving down, and it pulled the little plane down just far enough that the wheels on the plane started touching the tops of some corn stalks in a field. And the next thing I know, I was driving my little plane along the ground with corn stalks on every which way, getting cut by the prop and everything, and then my plane was scattered across the field with me sitting at one end. And I'll tell you, it is never fun to fly out of an airport and then have to walk back and explain how you got there without the plane. So,
Did you get in trouble with the farmer?
I did. I got yelled at by the farmer, but mostly he was concerned that other pilots had been coming by and scaring his cows. It wasn't so much the corn and beans that I had taken out, but yeah, but he was upset for the nerves of his cows. So let's see, and then I'm trying to think of another good one like that. I had several close calls while caving, and had some situations where uh, we didn't, not just me, but probably several of the people that were there were not the brightest in how we had done safety. This was before, when I was doing most of my caving, it was before they had invented these nice LED lights. So we had to use old carbide lamps where you used calcium carbonate and a little water drip, and it would produce a methane gas, and then you would use a little thumb wheel to light it. So you had this little light that you're going around on your head. But it's not a perfectly stable lamp up there, and so something clogs that teeny tiny little hole that the gas is coming out of, and then suddenly your light won't work. And we usually had a backup light or two, but you could pretty easily find yourself 4 hours getting to somewhere, and now your carbide lamp won't work, and now you've got to figure out how to get back in a half an hour with a dying flashlight. So some of those days were a lot of fun too.
Well, coal mining is a dangerous thing also.
Yeah, coal mining is probably about the safest thing I did, though, because at least there are people that are concerned about your safety, and you're wearing the right helmet and the gear. Mostly when I worked in the coal mines, I worked both surface mines and underground mines. I have to say I like the underground mines better. I think from all my time caving, being underground didn't bother me, and in the underground mines, it's cool. And it's not raining on you and everything. When you work on the surface mines, and the job that I had where I worked loading explosives, it was always either horribly hot and dusty, or horribly cold and snowy, or horribly wet and rainy. It was just miserable every day out there, and you always came home, just filthy from head to toe. So working in the underground mines was a breeze compared.
Which is, I'm assuming, why it's on your not so fun job
list. Yeah, that's exactly why it's not on my not so fun job list. I've got pictures of myself at the end of the day, and you can just about see just my eyes where there's coal dust and mud all over me from head to foot.
So what made you in the writers group decide to try and do Word Posse?
For one, I think it sounded appealing to us to maybe have a little more control. For all writers, it's astounding, how much you surrender when you send that stuff off to the publisher, right? You've got to make your agent happy, you've got to make your editor happy, and then it finally gets to the publisher, and then they ask for changes, and it goes out, and you don't have a lot of control about whether or not it gets published, what gets published, the changes are made. So your connection to the reader is kind of at 3 steps removed. There's an agent, an editor, and a publisher all standing between you and the reader. I know books that I've had sold and published would sometimes be 3 or 4 years between the day that I finished writing and the day they actually showed up on a stand somewhere. And by then, you've written 2 or 3 other things, and it seems like in the distant past. And you don't get a lot of satisfaction in terms of the feedback you get. So I think one of the things that's really appealing to me is the idea that we could write something, edit it, go through it, and get it out on the stands, and not have somebody standing between us, and get some very direct feedback from the readers. And so that's what I'm enjoying. So if you've got a copy, please send me a review. I read them all.
Does it make the experience a bit more personal?
Yeah, I think so. I've done a lot of blogging in the last 10 years, and the real appeal of blogging for me is I write and I get it up there and I get feedback. I hear, but sometimes a book is like, you're writing and you're writing and you're writing, and then you get all those pages and you throw them in a well, and you don't even hear the echo because it's so far away and so faint. So anything you can do that gives you a better connection to the reader and gives me some sense that there is somebody out there that actually read the book, enjoyed the book, hated the book, but at least has some feedback on the book. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, I'm kind of part of the internet, so since I'm still super small, I feel incredibly personal with my videos, and I like the smaller channels that are relatively big, but within the thousands, but are still small enough that they can reply to all of the comment. Well, not all of them, but most of the comments, because to me that kind of shows that they still really care about their
Mm-hmm.
fans. But then you start getting up to into like the 100,000s and
You know,
millions, and
I love the videos from a young woman named V Hart. I don't know if you've ever come across her things or not.
I don't think
Take a
so.
look for it. But you know, she started off kind of small, but has now become so popular that yeah, you don't have quite the sense of community. Still love your stuff, V. So keep making them. But I do miss the early days. Maybe she does too. I don't know.
So, like, what do you think of Word Posse so far?
Well, so far it's I think it's been a good experience for all of us in that we've all worked together and we're getting a picture of sort of the effort that's required on the other side to actually take a rough manuscript and turn it into a finished book. And certainly some of that is enjoyable, but all of that is also work. So as writers, we're having to assume some of the work that's always been handled for us in the past by the publisher. So it's an education. We're also getting something of education in how difficult it is to draw attention to a book these days. Things have changed so much just over the last 10 years with the way publishing has gone. It's, of course, something that's affecting every creative industry, and publishing, though, may be the most vulnerable to this because it's so easy now and there's such a flood of words out there. I used to complain when I had a new novel out. I'm like, I got this new novel out, but there's 5,000 new novels out in a year, and getting some attention to my book is so hard. Well, now there's 5,000 new novels out in a week. You're a tiny little grain in a great big beach out there, and I think we need to learn a lot more about how to do promotion, which we haven't really done in the past. And we'll probably get a lot more appreciation for the people that are involved in bringing some attention to a book rather than just the people writing it. It's, as an author, you want to think you wrote it, that's the job's done. But I think to be publishers, we're going to have to think differently.
So, what do you think out of the main three or main four mediums of entertainment? There's books, movies, games now, and music. Out of the four, what do you think is most likely the hardest publishing books independently?
Well, I mean, certainly cost-wise, it's easy. It's cheapest to produce a book because you can set one person like me down at a table for a year and produce a book. So it's you certainly can't reproduce that ease of product generation, not even in music, which would come closest. But that's part of the problem is self-publishing. Gives us great opportunities and flexibility and that direct connection. But there's also a danger in that there's the filters have all been removed. Right now, anybody that wants to write a book writes a book, and the book is out there. And how does the average reader tell quality from bad quality? And I hate to think that the entire race now has come about. How much are you willing to spend to put a cover on your book, or how much are you willing to spend to put some ads out there for your book? Although to a large extent that's probably always been true. And I think even for critics and for book review sites, the sheer number of books that are coming out now has to mean that most of the really good quality books never get any attention. So it's kind of a conundrum, and I don't have a solution, obviously, but maybe we'll work on it.
And obviously, movies and games kind of have the added plus that they can kind of do public funding, like Kickstarter, because
and
that gets the word out there easier.
Right. And books can do that too, of course. I've seen people do that. And it's always interesting to me because if I could go on Kickstarter and say, hey, I want to write this book, and I'm trying to make $5,000, but really I'm going to write the book anyway because the book wants to be written, and I want to write it. So I feel like I'm being a little deceptive to go on Kickstarter and say, give me money for this because I'm probably going to make it anyway, and you could just spend your $2 when it's done. But I may try it. Not that I'm trying to be deceptive, but it would be nice to have some upfront cash, and that would also allow to do something like maybe print some hardcovers, 30-something books, and I don't think I've ever had one that had my name on it that came out in hardcover. Some that I ghost wrote came out in hardcover. So so I would still like to be able to print a hardcover. So maybe I'll Kickstarter something for that purpose.
Well, to me, it just like with a book, it is really kind of like, why would you have this on Kickstarter? Because you're gonna write a book. It takes time, yes, but it doesn't really cost that much to write. Whereas a movie, you can kind of, it makes
Right.
sense because you're using that money for props and
I think people on Kickstarter tend to be upset if they think they're paying for your time, right? You don't want to buy something on Kickstarter and say, hey, I'm trying to raise $100,000 so that I can knock off for a year and do nothing but work on this project. You kind of assume that the people that are doing things on Kickstarter are throwing their time into it. So when you see somebody doing a movie and they're trying to raise $1 million for the movie, you kind of think that that's expenses. That's what it's going to cost to actually run this film, do the editing, get the sound work, etc., etc., etc. Not I'm going to pay myself $1 million. So when it comes to writers, there really is no expense other than the pay yourself, unless you really wanted to spend a lot on that cover. So it's hard for me to see spending $5,000, $10,000 on a Kickstarter. Not that I'm not willing to give it a go. You mentioned games earlier. I think games are, in some ways, all the way from one end to the other, right? You certainly have games whose budgets are up there, as any Hollywood movie, and take an enormous staff and years to produce. But then you also have games that are the effort of one person, even working over just a weekend, and some of those are fantastic as well. I'm a big fan of small indie games, and still try to keep my hand in doing some game programming. So games can be anywhere on that continuum, and I'm happy to see that that's still true. That people are still finding interesting things to do, and that you can still have something as simple as Flappy Bird and have a huge success out of it.
well, games on just self-publishing can range anywhere from the virtual video to board games, and to me, board games, Kickstarter is the best form for those because I don't know how board game publishing works. It could be really hard to get your game published, and so on Kickstarter, it makes more sense because you're also doing the same thing as movies. You're kind of getting your props made with that, and you know, it just makes a bit more sense. And there are companies that will do things like video game companies that will do Kickstarters for actual like things to sell to people, like a figure for something.
Right.
Or
Well, I think Kickstarter in a lot of cases is great advertisement for the product. It's not so much that you need the Kickstarter money to make this board game happen, but putting the board game on Kickstarter is probably not just as good as any ad you could buy. You think about it, you put it up there on Kickstarter, they let you put a little movie in about how this game's going to go, you get to show off all your props, you get to set the different prices, you get to give people little rewards for coming in early. It's the best advertisement you can buy, and you buy it for nothing except for a percentage of sales, and so it's a heck of a deal.
it is. And Indiegogo, which is basically another form of Kickstarter, Rooster Teeth, they funded their movie on that by like 3 times as much as they needed.
Yep.
And so whenever you look at it like that, they broke a record for the most funded independent movie on Indiegogo. So that gets a ton of that's like an advertisement because newspapers,
Sure.
not newspapers, but news sites will publish about that.
I'm a sucker for things on both Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and I think the last time I looked altogether, I've chipped in on 70 something projects. So that's how much money I've wasted. Now most of those have been very small, but there's a few that I've invested more than $100 on, And yeah, I've been taken to the cleaners 3 or 4 times out of that too. But that's not a bad track record. I was stupid enough to go all in on a couple of Kickstarter or Indiegogo projects that turned out to be notoriously bad examples of people that ran off with the cash. But really, they are the exception. Most projects have been late, but they eventually get some product into my hands.
So what do you think the future of publishing is going to be then?
I think we're not seeing it yet. I don't think this is it. This is an intermediate stage we're in now for sure, and I think that's true across all of the media that we talked about, whether it's books or games or movies or music. All of them are in a tremendous transition right now, and I don't think anybody has a real clear picture of how it's going to work. We're having such overturning of the traditional models and the traditional idea of copyright and the traditional ways of funding and supporting artists. And you can't do it all by like selling T-shirts and writers don't have concerts for the most part. So we've got to come up with a model that works to reward good writing, and I'm not sure we're at that model yet. But I think it'll be discovered. I don't know what it looks like yet. Hopefully I'm still around when we find it.
Well, that was the final question, and I can't think of any more to stem off of what you just said, so that's all we got for this interview, and hopefully more Word Posse interviews will be made with more of the authors, and I will see you all in the next video. Don't know what it will be about, but it will be about something nerdy, probably. So, see ya.